why would we think that the traits and the talents that got us to today are going to be the same things that are going to be required to get us to 5 years from now? We are wildly created in order to be able to fear change, right?
Sure.
To be able to fear differences, things that are new, net new. When you don't know if it's a bear or a bunny coming out of the bushes,
yeah,
we are built to think it's a bear.
You're listening to the Sherpa Leadership Podcast, your guide to climbing higher in life and leadership. I'm Reed Moore, and alongside Chase Williams, we're here to help you break through obstacles, scale your potential, and lead with greater clarity and purpose. Hey guys, welcome back. You're listening to Sherpa Leadership Podcast. I'm Reed Moore, your host, along with Chase Williams, and we are excited to bring you part 2 of our incredible interview with John Monroe. As always, go to SherpaConsultingGroup.com. You'll be able to get the action guide for both part 1 and part 2, as well as all kinds of other goodies. And if you do us a solid, like, subscribe, and share this with a friend and a leader that you know needs encouragement. Here we go with part 2 of John Monroe. There's a group of leaders out there that have built incredibly stable businesses. I mean, they just, they're like clockwork, they work, but now they're running into, whether they see it or not, right? They're running into some headwinds or some serious disruption, and they don't understand how to reinvent continuously. Their issue is they have a good stable culture, but it's built off of this, like we do what we do and we'll die doing it. How do you address a leader who's phenomenal in so many ways and this one thing could take them out?
Yeah, I think just as you're saying that, it really made me reflect on one of the things that I think is most baseline is why would we think that the traits and the talents that got us to today are going to be the same things that are going to be required to get us to 5 years from now, right? So this idea of continuous reinvention, if you really step into it, we're actually looking at a scenario where the things that work today cannot work into the future, right? And so you have that stability. Somebody's hitting I always like to look at it as a stair-step, right? So many organizations, even when you see the hockey puck growth, especially in startups that I've been a part of, venture capital growth, even PE, they see this hockey puck, but it's actually not that. It's stair steps, right? It's a stair step, bang, we hit a wall. Okay, we actually can't go above this. Now we did some reinvention, right, internally of the person, of the process, of the people that are on board, and then we moved up. And not every leader is positioned to actually make that stair step, right? They actually might be, and oftentimes I think when we do those leadership assessments on what are you good at, there are leaders that are phenomenal at that process. I'm terrible at it, right? When you're talking about managing something continuously over time that's not growing or not expanding or doesn't have the opportunity to be creative, I'm not great at that, right? What I am great at is identifying some of those opportunities to bring the people in, to get them on board so then we can have that growth and move that direction. But I think at every organization, there are times for absolute stability, and then there's times for growth, and then there's times for stability. So I think it's much more of a stair-step model than it is that hockey puck growth. So in those scenarios, I think that the leader needs to decide, am I willing to do the things that are necessary to grow with the organization, right? To actually put the organization in a position to win. And am I the right leader to do that? It might mean that they say, no, it's time for me to actually step aside as the integrator, and I'm going to bring in a creative to actually ideate, do skunk works, to test out the markets, to test out the places we could go without disrupting or breaking the model that's worked so successfully for us, while allowing us to be creative and innovate. That's going to take us in the future.
Love it.
Yeah, there's this idea of reinventing, right? From identity versus to identity, right? And so there's all these well-known examples of companies that decided not to reinvent. You've got the Blockbusters and the Kodaks and Nokia, right, with smartphones. And they said, no, we're moving toward our identity, which is, renting videos out of a retail store.
Yeah.
And it caused them to be irrelevant versus from identity, which is hey, what do we actually do for the consumer? And might there be a new strategy like streaming that they're interested in as an example, right? I think that's the risk of not reinventing. One of the most common topics of the day right now is AI.
Sure.
Right? And how that's causing reinvention or forcing reinvention or deserves reinvention because of the benefit it can bring, right? John, you were in the tech industry, right? With kind of a tech experience. I can only imagine that the pace of reinvention in a tech space is potentially even faster than in other industries, right? How do you manage the pace of reinvention, right? How do you determine when is the right time and how much is too much? And like, how do you think through that when it's something that is just a constant?
Yeah. So I hear two different questions in that, and one really focused on identity, right? Which I think is really the most important question that we all need to ask. Yeah. Are we operating in a way that gets us a promotion, right? Are we operating in a place that says, well, the successful person that I'm looking at has done X, right? Which may or may not be aligned with your personal identity, right? It may be aligned with their identity. So as we try to step into those identity characteristics that are not ours, that are not of our identity, we find ourselves running into those walls of, why is this not working? I saw what the model was. I replicated the model. Well, that's not part of your identity. That's not the way that you actually show up. So as you talk about from versus to identity, I think that's really an important thing for us to look at as organizations. And I think to the second part of your question is, as we're looking at organizations and thinking about, how you actually work through continuous change and constant change, especially in an ever-evolving environment. As you look back, I think this idea, it's fascinating. They talk a lot about product market fit, especially in startups, right? Venture capital-based startups, et cetera. And they say, well, what are we looking at from product market fit? Well, one of the things that they oftentimes miss in that process is product market fit price, right? And the reason price is so important that it truly gets down to the soul of it, right? It truly gets down to, I'm not just asking you if you like this, if this is the way that we should, if this is the widget we should create, if you're willing to buy it, but actually we're going down to the point of, sign on the dotted line that says you are willing to pay for this if I create it, right? And actually getting that. So that last little small question that actually gets to somebody's soul and actually creates fear in the buyer of, well, I guess I'm not necessarily sure. But you were confident 2 minutes ago. Yeah. I just told you all you have to do is now say, okay, here's what you're going to pay for it. Will you sign up for it? If I build it, I'll build it, a year from now and bring it to you. Will you pay for it? Oh, well, that's a different conversation, right? So it really gets down to those baselines of their identity and their fear in the process. And there's a lot of different things that can do that, but that's just one of the ones that I've seen be most consistent in that process. So you're reinventing, you're testing, you're creating MVPs. MVP has been a buzzword in tech for so long, right? How do you create the minimum viable product in order to be able to test it? Will people actually consume it? Is the best idea ever. Because I have met some incredibly brilliant people that are 10x as intelligent as I am. And some of the ideas they come up with and some of the theories that they're actually basing, it will be the wave of the future.
Sure. And
I guarantee, just like the Palm Pilot, right now, the world is not ready to accept those. They're not ready to buy in. They're not, they can't actually get themselves to a place. I could hardly get myself to a place of understanding how it's going to impact how you would actually create that from a sustainability model. So
that's really, really good. I think that's so smart, right? Adding in that price, right? You say like, hey, Chase, would you like to fly to Mars and back safely? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome. All in. Great, no problem. It's only going to cost you $30 million for one trip. I'm like, whoa, not ready for that yet.
Totally.
Right? So like, that is really, really good. I don't want anyone listening to miss that piece because it plays to timing. It doesn't mean that people will not actually regularly pay to fly to Mars one day, but the price has to fit in there too, right? Yeah. And that could go along with any service or any product. It's like this vision that's so far out. If we start moving to it too quickly and the marketplace isn't ready to accept it from a price standpoint, it causes us to ask those questions around when. How quickly, right? So I love that. That's so.
And it really goes. If you break that down, I hope this came across. But as you break that down, that's actually an emotive scenario, right? Oh, sorry, my most valued resource. I have to now promise it for this. It goes to their heart to see where their heart is actually positioned, but then it truly creates emotion where some of the other things of excitement and opportunity and creativity and wow, that would be rad. Those really drive the initial decision. This really takes it back to a core soul question, right? What are you fearful of? How are you willing to, put yourself out there to engage in this?
It makes me think, just kind of tying that conversation back into the identity conversation that we had a little bit earlier. It seems like one of the leaders' worst enemies is a motive that's aligned with the love of their idea or the love of reinvention, because it really misaligns the motives of the company and the people all the way to the consumer from the next decision that you're going to make, right? It was just one of those things where like, man, if I get really excited about my idea and I get some level of identity out of that, boy, I'm running blind. And that could be really bad for me, for the people, and for the consumer if I can't shift out of that.
Yeah. I think is this idea of a discretionary effort that I've talked about for years. And it comes based on a thesis of, as we're talking about what is culture, it's actually identifying what creates discretionary effort. It's a really easy leading and lagging indicator. Are you getting discretionary effort from this employee? And what that really means is, are you getting that top 20%, right? They're going to show up with somewhere between 50 and 80% just because they don't want to get fired, because they want to be identified as doing a good job. But that's wildly different than when they're truly engaged, right? When they're thinking about the problems, when they're at home, when they have, their off time, they're excited to actually engage in this. And there's a bunch of matrices that have been, matrices, I guess it would be, matrices, one of those things
One of them.
that have been created around this idea. What actually creates that safety in a culture, right? What creates the safety in an individual? So there's things like, do they understand the mission and vision of the organization? Does that mission and vision align with their personal mission and vision? Which again goes back to identity. Do they actually know their personal mission and vision, right? Is the organization investing in them? Do they have opportunities to grow? Do they see a clear path to move forward? Do they understand how their unique impact every day impacts that? Like a bunch of different things that actually go into this kind of full matrix.
Yeah.
That allow for that person to be so wildly excited that they're going to give that discretionary effort, right? So as you think about as a leader, how do we actually get in a position where we can measure discretionary effort of our people? Because that really tells you the true story of how engaged they are, how much they're ready to dig in and kind of go that extra mile. And that doesn't mean, tons of extra hours. It doesn't, a lot of those things are I think, misidentified as those leading indicators. If somebody's really engaged, they're putting in 80 hours. No, they just know that's the expectation. They don't want to get fired. Yeah. That's way different than you actually getting their heart and soul and creativity. And that's where that true magic comes for every organization. Mm-hmm. The more folks that you have on fire for the organization, the higher likelihood that you're going to have success and you're going to be able to build that.
I heard a mentor of mine say a couple weeks ago, he said, your position entitles you to somebody's function, but it doesn't entitle you to their person. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a big deal. That discretionary effort that comes from their person. Like there's that's not a title thing, right? And even if the hours line up and it's more hours versus more hours, wildly different.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got one for you. So, you're a leader and you've got this idea or vision, or you're paying attention to the marketplace way out, and it's clear to you that there needs to be some sort of reinvention or change in the organization, and you've done everything right. You've taken the proper time, you have good discipline around the strategy, you've let people in the organization help you with their perspective and authoring the reinvention, and now everything's like in place and we're starting to move toward this thing that we all believe in. We have their hearts and minds around this change that needs to be made. And we look up after implementing after a few months and we're like, whoops, I think this was wrong, right? Like I'm seeing something different now, or we're getting feedback from the marketplace, and like this change that we actually executed perfectly may not actually be the right change.
Yeah.
Now what do I do?
Yeah.
What does a leader do in that position?
Oof. I love that. And it's going to be a really easy answer for me on this one, because if you did that process the right way, the trust that's built in that environment allows for exactly the same trust for the next pivot, right? And in fact, it makes every pivot easier. As I hear about you as a leader and how open you are to feedback, criticism, all of those pieces throughout folks in your organization, that's going to create an environment where when you have that pivot, you say, yikes, oops, we're seeing these indicators that are telling us, metrics that are telling us we're not facing the right direction. Do we feel like we are? Do we feel like we're not, et cetera? You want to be really careful with that, because if you start asking those questions, again, too early in the process where you still need people to be executing on that, you got to make sure that you do that at the right time, at the right stage. But certainly going back to the top in that process and saying, okay, so now that we actually are executing on this, what do we think? And actually we're seeing things that suggest that we're not going the right direction. You go through that same framework. And again, a lot of times it's kind of a waterfall, unfortunately, top to bottom. But sometimes there's other, seers at different levels of the organization that you can get immediate feedback from. Again, not making them question, ooh, Reed just came in and said, and asked me 5 or 6 questions that, knowing Reed, that means he's worried that we're going the wrong direction. So, that's where the mastery comes in that process. How do we actually ask those questions in a curious manner in order to see, is what I'm seeing here accurate? Just like you did in that same process. So it's really just replicating that same process up and down. And then people get more and more used to that and say, well, it's okay that we change because I know why we did this. I knew what the measurements were that we were moving for. The measurements are not coming out. The metrics are not coming out, telling us that we're aligned. Starting back at the top. What you have to be careful of is that that's not happening every week, right? Every other week, and you go through the process. So I think that's where your challenges come in, is there's too much of that. And it's literally constant change rather than incremental change or change at the right time for the right reasons, right? Yeah.
So kind of as a follow-up to that, how do you navigate it when you're unclear whether you need to wait longer for something to mature versus you need to change targets? And I've had that happen more times than I can count, where I can't tell if we're going in the right direction and you just need to hold fast, or if we actually need to pivot, which unfortunately comes with a level of starting over in that kind of maturation process. So how do you navigate the best timing for making that decision?
Yeah. It's interesting you asked that, because that's one of the challenges I think I have as a professional is a lot of times I have really strong visibility into where to go, what feels right, a lot more of the gut feel. What people would a lot of times say is, I have a gut feel about this. But that really means they're actually putting together data points that might not be net obvious. They might not be able to measure that well, but you're able to kind of collectively put those together in a really powerful manner that can both inform change and incentivize change. But I'm actually not a master at that. So in that process, I always bring in people in the process who are better at measurement, right? What's a metric that we can actually stick in here? I'll tell you one challenge from history, and it's still, I think, a question that is out there, is how do you actually measure engineering output, right? Do you measure number of releases that they do? Do you lines of code written? There are so many different ways that you could actually put an objective measurement on that rather than a subjective one, that are going to move you in the wrong direction. Oh, they all created more code because they were incentivized to create more code. What's crap code, right? It actually isn't moving us forward in the way that we wanted to. And so I think that's just a really great example of that takes some brilliant minds, way more brilliant than my own, to actually identify a process to measure that, right? Because we know the outcome, we know where we're trying to go. Oftentimes I can feel, it actually feels like we're doing really well, but that's not going to do the, informing the organization and informing our decision. So having those people in that process that allow for those metrics to be created. Same reason I always have a CFO or somebody in that style is because that's where I fall short, right? I'd love to take the information that's created from that report and, create a thesis or strategy beyond that, which sometimes the matrix people can't. With that said, I just fall short in that matrix process. So I always make sure there's somebody running alongside me that can help me with that process, that can really dig in there.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, what questions have we not asked that we should talk about today? This has been awesome.
So good.
I think as we talk through this idea of like seeing the future and identifying the things that are going to make change either hyper successful or not, I think there's this natural tendency to say, oh, I'm not doing well, or I'm not a great strategist, or my team doesn't do well in continuous change. I think you said something right out of the gate. We're creating unnatural processes for a lot of people. There are certainly people who cannot stay in an environment for very long at all if there's not constant change, right? Sure. Maybe that's their ADHD or my ADHD or, some of those things that actually drive that need for continuous adjustment or change. But most people in organizations are fearful of change, especially if they don't have visibility. And so I want to really make sure that everybody realizes that from a human nature standpoint, we are wildly created in order to be able to fear change, right?
Sure.
To be able to fear differences, things that are new, net new. When you don't know if it's a bear or a bunny coming out of the bushes, we are built to think it's a bear, because that's actually going to create the safest environment for us, right? So that same thing happens throughout organizations. I see change. I don't know if that means I'm going to get fired, if we're going to restructure the organization, if there's going to be a reorg, if we're going to now fail and I can't move forward. So that need for stability, that need for security, that automatically switches on in all of us when we go through change dynamics. Even as leaders who need that change, we oftentimes find ourselves saying, ooh, am I going to, all of a sudden, this is really going well. We're doing great. And now all of a sudden we're going to take us down a rabbit hole that makes us fail.
Yeah.
So I guess there's empathy in that process of making sure that everybody realizes human nature drives us that direction, and that's okay. And we have to be aware of it and able to kind of address that as it goes.
It strikes me as, gosh, what a powerful conversation here, right? It strikes me as one of the most important pieces of leadership, right? Because here we are talking again about we know logically that change is the only constant in business, right? If we're playing the infinite game, change is really the only constant. We know that logically.
Yep, sure.
And we're also acknowledging that emotionally as people, we tend to resist change. And in the gap, right? You mentioned trust earlier in the gap, but also in the gap is leadership. Right? This if there's going to be constant conflict around change, which is never going to stop, then we need great leaders in that space to help people navigate it. Yeah. And gosh, you just shared so much wisdom around that with us today and with those listening and watching the podcast, because it's not easy, right? There's nothing easy about leadership in general, but there's certainly nothing easy about helping people navigate the one thing they resist the most. That's critical to the future success of them, the organization, the mission, and otherwise. Yeah. So it's definitely one of those obvious gaps that a leader needs to stand in, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of the times where I remember being on a call with our operations staff, and I'm just excited to share some good news, right? And because their core job is stability for the organization, I remember getting about 3 minutes into this, and everybody was already kind of frozen up. I'm like, is everybody okay? And they're like, are you about ready to change something on us? I'm like, oh, no, I'm just going to share some good news. And so that pattern, one of the things that has been somewhat effective is the pattern of telling everybody what's going to happen in advance. Like, hey, we're going to talk about change that benefits the company and, is going to make you be able to do more with less effort, just kind of give them the lay of the land, even if it's going to be hard, because man, my experience has been, if you're going to deliver some news around change, if you don't address it right out of the gate, nobody's going to even hear what you said until the very end, where maybe it's just all the fear bunched up at once, right?
You hit home on something that has always been a bias of mine, again, and I think it's been pretty effective, and that is, as you're delivering that news, the less you can talk and the more other people in your organization can speak. It creates validation. It creates safety. There's something unfortunate about being in the CEO's spot or an executive leadership spot that we almost forget. We're like, no, everybody trusts me. I'm their friend. I'm et cetera. It's totally not true, right? There is something about he is the ultimate boss. She is the ultimate boss that drives, again, that fear, that respect, those other pieces that are natural emotional instincts that create a bias on everything that is said. And so as much as you create a safe environment, it's not as safe as you think it is, right? It's not as safe as I think it is. And it's not as safe as, how we go through that. And so I have found that diffusing that oftentimes can come with who's delivering the news, right? How far down the organization are you getting that? Is that actually somebody that's, a line leader at the bottom that is actually, and I say bottom respectfully, right? Perfectly, that is actually delivering the news. Hey, and you really are going to spend a lot of time coaching, you're going to spend a lot of time guiding them through that, but how much more powerful is it when it's feels ground source instead of Reed coming down from on high and dropping this news of our most creative strategy, right?
Yeah, super, super smart. Yeah, we're doing an event last week and talking about communication, and one of the things I said, as a leader, you have to just come from the assumption you're not approachable. It doesn't matter how personally approachable you are and how much you work on it. The fact that you have a position, it makes you unapproachable, and so you have to actively work on that. And I think that's brilliant to be, especially if somebody else has some DNA in the what's being developed and changed. What a cool opportunity for them, and to diffuse that power gap.
you see so many of these CEOs and leaders that try to solve that by even just changing their title. Something as simple as, I'm not the CEO, I'm the,
Chief People Officer.
Chief People Officer, Chief Strategist, or whatever it is, right? Yeah. I'm a innovator, whatever. And you can see what they're doing. You can see why they're doing it. And some of those are effective, but again, it's just one thing out of, I think what makes people who are perceived to be successful and people who feel like they have more success in life, in their organizations across the board, I think we forget that there's tiny decisions that they're making every day, all day, right? Every 30 seconds they get to make an impact on somebody or steal joy from somebody, right? And so how are you actually making those tiny, tiny decisions throughout the day that all added together? It's not like I dropped this big strategy and it won. It's how did I make somebody feel when they came and asked me a question? How did I respond to that scenario, right? And so going back to your point, the more we can realize that it's those micro moments that are actually defining all of it, I think we can be a lot more impactful and have better outcomes across the board.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
How
this
lucky
has been amazing.
I
know.
Oh, gosh,
it's great to know smarter people.
Oh my
Way
God.
smarter people.
I'm blessed to be here.
Just to get to expose some of the knowledge to our listeners. Thank you for listening to the Sherpa Leadership Podcast. If this episode inspired you, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, share it with another leader. You can also go to SherpaConsultingGroup.com for more tools and resources. Remember, leadership is a journey. Every step you take matters, so keep climbing. We'll see you next time.